Okay, this part is we are check is the shipping contract. What is the shipping contract? We are thinking is the two main parties. The first is the who is the parties of this shipping contract, and the where is the focus on the what is the purpose we are making the shipping contract. Okay, we are starting. What is the shipping contract? First is the contract of operatement in a general ship, and the BS is the charter party contract. Is first is the contract of operatement is operatement contract in a general ship is a transport contract to ship individually goods. Under such a contract, cargo is transported using a liner, and the contracting parties can include multiple unspecified shippers. This contract in a general ship is commonly signed for goods small in volumes, such as is a general merchandise. A second is the about is the this charter parties contract is on agreement is two charterers a ship in part is or in whole to transport cargo. Type of charter is a contract is include is a voyage charter, time charter, and the last is the bareboat charter. It is a type of the contract, and the shipping methods is used is under a charter contract is a tram shipping. The ship owner contract with a specific shipper usually is for bulk cargo transport. So is the you can see is the we are comparing is the contract of operatement and the charter parties contract. Is first is the purpose is I am dividing some sectors. Purpose is shipping methods, is liability, is the contracting parties, and the consignor, and the what is the trading is the cargoes. Second is the key elements of a shipping contract. Now let's look at these key elements of a shipping contract. A shipping contract is between a carrier and the shipper, and the states is the rights and duty is obligation as like of each parties. Also, is a bill of lading is issued as evidence of the shipping contract at the shipper's request, and this bill is issued is by the carrier to the shippers. This document is specifies the carriers, shippers, port of loading, is a port of discharging, and the freight charges, which is should be different is depending on the whether liner shipping or tramper shipping. And this is element is of the in the bill. It is specified is by the law. Especially is all kind of the international conventions have. Also, it's the Korean maritime laws is we have this is specified in the regulations. It also is a stop rate is the loading and discharging cost, and which is contracting parties is responsible is, for them. A charter party contract includes is a rate is.
If you're like me, you've seen wharfs and ports and been fascinated by the huge ships, cranes, trucks, and most of all, by the containers stacked like building blocks. But what are the processes of container ports like this? How are containers unloaded? Where do they go? And what happens next? We're going to find out if containerization is as orderly as it seems, or if there is some chaos in these neatly stacked rows, and what opportunity and challenges automation has brought to the shipping industry. Containerization has changed the world. Previously, ships would hold multiple smaller loads, all jumbled together into a cargo hold. Now the sorting of cargo into containers is done before the cargo is loaded. This allows ships to have greater efficiency when loading and unloading cargo. But it has also brought new challenges for organisation, as gigantic ships dock in large ports and need to unload hundreds or thousands of containers at a time. Container terminals are hubs of intermodal transport. That means that containers are switching modes of transport from a ship, which travels on the sea, to either road or rail. Containers can also be moved by air, but this is not usually the focus of container ports. Switching modes of transport is not quite as simple as loading a cargo container from a ship onto a truck. Multiple steps and organisational challenges are involved before the container rolls out of the freight yard. First, the container must be unloaded from the ship. This is achieved with huge gantry cranes that are able to lift the several tons of container and its cargo. Cranes can be hinged to allow for passage of large ships beneath, or can be fixed to reduce airspace being taken up. Cranes connect to containers by their corner fittings, which, like most other parts of a container, are standardised throughout the world by the International Organisation for Standardisation. Another international standard is the unique identifier number, which helps to keep track of each container. The containers are typically loaded onto terminal tractors. These funny-looking trucks are meant for short-distance haulage in order to get the container from beside the ship into the storage yard, where the containers wait to be picked up by a truck or a train. In order to move containers around a storage yard and onto trucks and trains, there are several options for machinery. Two of the most interesting are reach stackers and rubber tyre gantries. Rubber tyre gantries have wheels and are cranes that are able to fully straddle containers. Larger versions may run on tracks rather than tyres and can straddle multiple rows of containers. Reach stackers have a long arm that can easily be used to stack containers several rows deep, or to negotiate them onto semi-trailers and rail cars. Every step of the process described so far has the capacity to be fully or semi-automated. And in fact, at some of the terminals at the port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, they all are, at least partially. At this port, a crane operator remotely operates the gantry crane via computer software that unloads containers from a ship. The container is loaded onto a fully automated terminal truck, which drives it to the storage area to be unloaded by an automated stacker crane. This is one area where logical planning augmented by computers can provide a huge benefit. Knowing exactly what date and time a container needs to be picked up, a computer can plan the most efficient way to stack containers. This ensures the container isn't buried too deep in the stacks when it comes time to leave the yard, reducing the number of operations required to access the required container. There are still some storage yards around the world that use a paper-based tracking system. For some of these yards, this means that containers are simply stacked according to when they are brought into the storage yard, so that when the time comes to take them out again, they might be at the bottom of a stack of containers. Like many other industries, computerized automation provides some unique benefits over human operation, such as accuracy of repetitive tasks and logical planning of efficient processes, until something goes wrong and many hours are spent trying to troubleshoot and fix the issue. For now at least, humans maintain the advantage of adaptability over fully automated machines. Automating a container port is very expensive, but ports implementing this technology hope to gain benefits such as increased productivity and increased safety. Of course, even at ports where automation exists, humans are still employed to oversee and maintain the machines and rectify problems as they arise. As automation continues, concerns about job losses are always on the forefront of debate. There is also the real cost to society, with a smaller income tax revenue stream to fund things like roads and rail, the very things the transport industry relies on. Ideas have been put forward for a robot tax to help subsidise this loss. However these problems are dealt with in the future, it's clear for now that the inevitable march of the machines will continue. Perhaps the solution lies balanced somewhere in the middle, with human operators and overseers able to quickly adapt to unforeseen problems, but with machines performing dangerous tasks for us, and with organisational systems augmented by computerised calculations.
Okay, we are checking the Korean law is applying to maritime transport. Its first one is the history of the Commercial Act. Let's move on to this Korean maritime law. As the Commercial Act was enacted on July 20, 1962, and has been amended 25 times since. The maritime law is a part of the Commercial Act. It was amended made on October 31st 2017 that days from the international agreements were incorporated into this law. The carriers' responsibilities in particular were defined from the time of the loading at the time of the discharges as per the Hague-Bisbee rules. But the 2017 is amended, extended them to cover from the time of the receipt of goods to the time of delivery as per the Hague rules. It also is adopted rules of limiting carriers' liability for compensation to a kilogram basis amount. This part is the carriers' responsibilities. First is the carriers' responsibilities under Hague-Bisbee rules. Now let me talk about the carriers' responsibilities specified by the Hague-Bisbee rules. It is paragraph 2 of Article 3 that defines the carriers' responsibilities. You can see this Article 3 of the Hague-Bisbee rules. I read it. Paragraph 2 is subject to the provisions of Article 4. The carriers shall properly and carefully load, handles, store, carry, keep careful, and the discharging and the goods carried. It says it's subject to the provisions of Article 4. The carrier shall properly and carefully load. I read as like is the load, handles, the store, carry, keep careful, and the discharge the goods carried. Let's look at these responsibilities one by one. First of all, it mentions the carrier's duties to exercise due diligence. First one is the word is properly is used to describe the due diligence as should be exercised considering the nature of the goods carried. The word is the careful means that a carrier is the exercise of due diligence is considering the natures of goods carried thoroughly and the technically as on maritime transportation expert. Okay, second is the carriers is a main responsibility each by each is we are finding. Is first is the loading. Loading means is the loading cargoes onto the ship. The time of the loading is when the carrier's responsibilities for a cargo is begins. Second is the handlers. Handling is means is the handling goods onto the ship is considering the nature of the goods. Three is the stowing. It is the act of the properly arranging goods onto the ship to ensure is safety is for the ship and the goods. Four is carrying. This carrying means is the transporting the goods is safely to the destination. Five is the keeping and the caring for the goods. It means it is keeping and the managing the goods in a way is the peace nature of the goods. Last is the discharging. Is the act of unloading is the goods is from the ship. As per the Hague-Bisbee rule, this is when the carrier's responsibility finish. So is the according to this kind of Hague-Bisbee rules, the Article 2 is there mentioned is this from loading and discharging. There are 7 items is about the carrier's main obligations. Number 3 is the scope of the carrier's responsibility under Hague-Bisbee rules. In short, is the Hague-Bisbee rules define the carrier's responsibilities from at the time of the loading is to the time of the discharges, which can also be described as tackle to tackle. This tackle is meaning is the rigging of the ship. So the expression of indicates that the carrier's responsibility begin when the cargo is past this rigging as the loaded and the finish is when the goods past the rigging discharging. This means is the at the time of the rigging is past, the carrier says the responsibility will be finished. Korean maritime law is, however, follows the Hamburg rules. Is not accepting is the this Hague-Bisbee rules at the changing of the big chance at the time of the 2007. So it's we are at the time is the accepted this Hamburg rules. We are changing many parts to the carriers responsibilities. Okay, so Hamburg rules is at the time is not the Hague-Bisbee rule, which means is the law specifies a wider scope of the carrier's responsibility. Korean maritime law is closer to the Hamburg rules than to the Hague-Bisbee rules. In that, it provides that the carrier's responsibility begins when the cargoes are received to the carrier, and the finish is the carrier's responsibility at the time of the delivers the cargoes to the consignee. This part is number 4 is the scope of the carrier's responsibility under Korean maritime law. We have the specific regulation is Article 795 is a duty of care for cargoes. If a carrier does not prove that she is the crew or other employees of the ship have the exercise due care concerning the receipt, loading, store, transportation, storage, discharging, and the delivery of the cargo. He and she shall be liable to compensate for the damages incurred due to loss of damages to or rate or labor of the cargoes. As you can see, the scope of the carrier's responsibility defined is by Korea's maritime law is from receipt to the deliverers of these goods. Okay, so next part is the carrier's general responsibility. Is a definition is an article of the Hague Rules. Discuss this before the Hague Bisbee Rules define the carrier's general responsibilities in Article 3. I already read this part so is the subject to the provision of Article 4. We are saying is seven different responsibilities by the carriers. It's from loading and the finish is discharge the goods is to the goods is carried. As the articles is also defines the carriers is the duty to exercise the due diligence is follows. So you are focus on the two is the main wording is the what is the properly and what is the carefully. First one is the properly is due diligence is needed is based on the nature of the goods. So is that this proper is we are focusing is the nature of the goods. Second is the what is the carefully. We are carefully to check the due diligence at the carrier exercise maritime transport export. As nowhere the carrier is the maritime transporting expert. So this part is the carefully is the base under the who is the carrier. Drove and the technical is the due diligence is exercised by a maritime transport expert, whether the natural goods is taken into account. The third is about this the loading is. When it comes to loading, there are 2 points into time to consider. The first point in time is when loading, the carrier is become responsible for the cargo as it passed to tackle of the ship as per Article 2 of Hague Bisbee Rules. Second point is in time of the people raiding. There are 2 scenarios to consider. First one is when the cargo is under the shipper's controls. The first one is when the cargo is under the shipper's control. The second is the second one is when cargo is under the warehouse's control. Excluding is one is the directly by the shipper. As before is I told you is the under the Hague Bisbee rules is the carrier's responsibility is starting is the logging. Logging is the past loading is the cargoes to the ship. So is the before the loading is the when happen the cargoes is the damage or lost is it is not related with the carrier's responsibility. So viewer is the remember this point is the before loading is the not related with the carrier's responsibility. Okay, is number 4 is the stowage. Stowage is the act of storing goods under the ship properly to ensure safety is for the ship and the goods. The carrier is liable for loss of or damages to the cargo arising from inadequate stowage and the willful misconduct is or omission by the carrier or the agent or the servant of the carrier. Number 5 is carriage, custody, and care for the cargoes. Responsible to the carriage, custody, and the care of the cargo means that the carrier is responsible for ensuring a freight, a direct voyage, and the checking the cargoes is carried by the taking into account the nature of the goods. The carrier is also responsible for loading legitimate the goods and the notifying the such an act and can consider destroying or selling the goods to, for example, prevent is spoilage of the cargo as per paragraph 6 of Article 4 of Hague-Bisbee rules. So I is read the related is this Article 4 paragraph 6 of the Hague-Bisbee rules. It is about the dangerous cargoes. So I read the related regulation of the Hague-Bisbee rules. Article 4, paragraph 6. Its goods of inflammable, explosive is a dangerous nature to the shipments, whereof the carrier is master or agent of the carrier has not consented with the knowledge of their nature and characters may at any time before discharge be rendered at any place or destroyed or rendered innocuous by the carrier without compensation. And the shipper of such goods shall be liable for all damages and expenses directly or indirectly arising out of the or resulting from such shipment. If any such goods is shipped, whether such knowledge and the consensus shall become dangerous to the ship or cargo, they may, in like manner, be rendered at any place or destroyed or rendered innocuous by the carrier without his liabilities under the part of the carrier, except two general average, if any. Also, the same part is the Hamburg rules there have. As article is 13 and the paragraph 4. Okay, so I read it. If in case it is a Hamburg rule, if in cases where the provisions of paragraph 2 subscribes the B of this article don't apply or may not be invoked. Dangerous is good become actual dangerous to the life is a property. They may be unloaded, destroyed, or rendered innocuous. As per circumstances, Mays requires without its payment of compensation exercise where there is an obligation to contribute in general averages or where the carrier is liable in accordance with the provisions of Article 5. So is you can see is the very similar is the regulations in Hague-Visby rules and Hamburg rules is Article 13. Okay, this part is the carrier's responsibilities under Korea Maritime Law. It's the first is the Korea Maritime Law is the we have is the Article 795 of the these articles. So is I read it. This articles is the wording. If a carrier does not prove that he and she is the crews or the other employees of the ship have exercised due care concerning the receipt, loading, stowage, transportation, storage, unloading, and the delivery of the cargo, he and she shall be liable to compensate for the damages incurred due to loss of damages to or rate or liable of the cargo. So is we are is each bar each is the we check the carrier's responsibilities under this Korea Maritime Law. Okay, so we start this number 2. So carriers is responsible. Is the first one is the cargo receipt. The first responsibility of the carrier is cargo receipt, which means as per is loading responsibilities lies with the party in charge of the loading the cargo. If the shipper is in charge of the loading, the carrier bears no responsibility. The carrier bear responsibilities when he or she is in charge of the loading. It's number 3 is the same applies to the stowages. Responsibilities lies with either the shippers or the carriers, depending on who is in charge of the stowing the contracted cargos. So it's the next day's part is where I explains detail is who have the responsibilities, the charge of the stowing. Is the number 4 is the about the transportation. Responsibility for transportation is a fundamental responsibilities of the carrier, which is in line with whether responsibilities for direct buoyancy. So is the legal principle regarding the deviation cases and the price. Number 5 is the storages. The carrier's responsibility for storage of cargo is determined by the nature of the cargo and notice by the shipper. Number 6 is the discharge. As for the discharge, is the responsibility lies whether either the shipper or the carriers depending on who is in charge of the discharge these cargoes. The same is as like is who has the charge of the loading, storage, and the last is the discharge the same. So is we are need to distinguish who has the charge of this kind of the operation. So maybe it's the loading and the store, also the discharging operation is by the shipper, and the happen some damage and loss to the cargoes is at the time the carriers have no any responsibility any happened damages. Okay, last is the delivery. You can find this in the Hague Dispute rules. There is no mention this about the delivery, but our is Korean maritime law is we have the one more is the insert is about the delivery. Okay, so I am explaining about the delivery. Lastly, is the delivery means is actual delivery, and the carrier should give the shippers a considerable amount of time to be notified of delivery and receive the cargo.